everyone was able to be there. We looked at Daniel 11 verse 40. We turn to Daniel 11 verse 40. Through the last few months we've been coming to some conclusions about what is happening around us. We've recognised through different histories and lines that, not in the last few months, but since 2016, we've realised that the King of the South is still a subject of Bible prophecy. And just by using the methodology of parable teaching, which is what Elder Parminder has been teaching much more forcefully in the recent past, I wanted to demonstrate how we could see that in verse 40 of Daniel 11. Using parable teaching, and as we slowly learn more of actually how to understand and study parables, we've been using the phrase compare and contrast. So if we were to look at Daniel 11 verse 40, we can see it gives us two separate histories, or two time of the end. And what we did last night was we took those two time of the ends and we compared and contrasted them. So for those of you that were there, I just want this to be a revision. So if we were to look at part A, it takes us to what waymark? Part A is Daniel 11 verse 40.
1798.
1780.
1798.
We also went to 1789. Why did we do that, Sister Natalie? We saw that it's marking a battle between the King of the North and the King of the South. And we wanted to expand on that. So why are they fighting? Why are they warring against each other? Or if it's talking about a war, when is that war? Because we tend to put it all in 1798. If the King of the North and the King of the South are fighting in 1798, where did that begin? In 1798, you jumped into the second line.
It was a better war, wasn't it?
In the second line, we can do them both at the same time. We would mark 1989. So I'm comparing and contrasting part A and part B of Daniel 11:40.
It started at 1979.
In here,
Yeah.
we can see the King of the South rising up in 1917.
Yeah.
But there's a particular war between the King of the North and the King of the South prior to 1989. And what did we say that war was? Because this is the Soviet Union and the United States.
Do you mean like it was a Cold War?
Yes. The Cold War, when did that begin?
It began, was it 1945?
Yes. So there's a previous war that leads us into this history. And there's a previous war that leads us into 1798. And we marked that as the French Revolution, which is why you gave us 1789. And then we saw that in this history of the French Revolution, there are battles, particularly 1796. This is the only actual battle between Napoleon and the Papal forces. So there are actual battles in this history, but it all takes us to 1798. And what is 1798?
The Deadly Wound.
The Deadly Wound. And then we read some quotes that talked about the deadly wound, and it quoted a particular Bible passage from Revelation 13. What passage? passage was that?
3 to 10. Revelation 17:3.
Yes, 3 and verse 10. If we just went to verse 10, this is the quote Ellen White lays over this history. And she says, "He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword." So not only is this history, the subject of a deadly wound, it's also the subject of a captivity, a counterfeit captivity, and also it's not just a deadly wound. The papacy killed with the sword, therefore it itself had to be killed. So is the papacy just wounded or does it die? It has to die. And when did it die?
It started to die a bit earlier on, didn't it? It started to die in 1790. It died in 1790.
This is the wound that's going to kill it. When does that wound to kill it?
It was 1799.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we went to a passage in Ellen White where she's visiting France, and she goes into a cathedral and sees a bust of the Pope who was alive in this period. And this is Pius the Sixth. And what does she say about Pius the Sixth?
Fulfillment of Bible prophecy.
Yes, he's a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. She says this is the man who's spoken of in prophecy, the man who was led into captivity, who received a deadly wound. She says it's Pius VI that went into captivity in 1798 and died in captivity in 1799. And I'll give you that reference because I think it's an important one. He died 29th of August 1799 after being moved from location to location. It's 8 MR 354.1. And she says, here is the one, the Pope marked in history who received the deadly wound. This is the man who was led into captivity and died in captivity. He's the one spoken of in prophecy. And he was led into captivity in 1798, but he died in captivity in 1799. So this is the deadly wound, this is the death. This is the leading into captivity. This is the dying in captivity. So we see a progressive fall. But what prophecy marks is not the death, it marks the deadly wound. And then we looked at Revelation 13, where it spoke of Revelation 17, where it spoke of a resurrection, and it is coming out of the pit, it's coming out of the grave. So we know that the King of the North will resurrect after 1799. So then we went to part B of Daniel 11 verse 4. And we see that there's an ongoing war between the King of the North and the King of the South. From 1945 past 1989. What is 1989 if we compare and contrast? It's a deadly wound. Did the Soviet Union end in 1989?
Soviet Union, yes.
2 years later.
2 years later, the Soviet Union didn't end in 1989. All that happened was a war opened and then closed again. Elections began, but nothing ended in 1989. What happened was a deadly wound for the King of the South. It isn't until 1991 that that power is properly defeated. This is a history of Pius VI. In 1799 he dies. Who is this history speaking about? Gorbachev. And the same day he steps down from government is the same day the Soviet Union ceases to exist. It marks the death, both the king and its kingdom, king and its kingdom.
Sorry, did you put Gorbachev at 1991? That was the date the Soviet riot on the list.
Yes.
Did you put it at 1991?
The Soviet Union died.
Yeah, yes.
At the same time, he announces his resignation. The Soviet flag is lowered, the Russian one is risen. And it ceases to exist. And then we read the newspaper article that said that this was a much smaller and less recognised event than was 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall. So whether it's history or prophecy, it's the deadly wound that receives the attention. And then if we were to bring this into our history, and we were to overlay these dates again, what is 1989? When they're fighting in our time, what history do we overlay with this?
2016.
There's a deadly wound to the King of the South. A battle here between North and South to South loses. Where do we mark that? Mr. Daisy?
Yeah, would it be Panium the next time this King of the South music?
Yes, I would say Panium. Because a rapier, the King of the North wins. So the next time we would mark a deadly wound is Panium. And it's Panium that is marked in history. Does the King of the South end at Panium? No. But this is the one that's marked in prophecy. We concentrate on Panium. But it doesn't end at Panium. It progressively falls until Sunday. This is the deadly wound. And this is the death. The beginning of our reform line gives us the clues to the end of this war. This is our second advent for the priests, and not knowing what it looks like is already illustrated by the beginning of our reform line. So when we start thinking about what we want to expect when we come to the battles of Rapier and Panium, it's already illustrated at the beginning of our reform line. And this pattern of deadly wound Panium, death at Sunday law, is illustrated in the history of Pyrrhus. So if you've looked at those histories of Pyrrhus, what is this battle? What is the Battle of Panium in the history of Pyrrhus? Beneventum. And what happens at Beneventum? Pyrrhus is defeated, but does the King of the South end? Pyrrhus is king of the kingdom. Pyrrhus is still alive, and Tarentum is still holding out. So whether it's a king or a kingdom, it doesn't end at the Battle of Beneventum. Instead, you see Pyrrhus continue to fight all the way to the Sunday War when he's killed.
But this, it represents a civil war, doesn't it? Beneventum, because it's only announcements time, happening.
Yes. In 1989, where's the King of the North? Because Daniel 11:40 says the King of the North comes against him in 1989. Where's the King of the North?
So can I ask that question again?
Where's the King of the North in 1989?
Geographically?
In the history of the King of the South and its fall, what is America doing in 1989, particularly if we want to talk about the Mennonite?
Sneaking alliance, waves it.
The armies of Rome.
Take that back to you.
The armies of Rome.
When we look at just the history of 1989, just take that year. Where is America doing that work?
They are there.
Where?
They're in a, what do you call it? They're in a period they're with the papacy, and they're making this agreement and giving this they defeat them of the economy. That's how they brought the Soviet down. I don't know what you call it. Is it a coup or what's it?
So they've gone into an alliance,
Yeah.
and they're doing this kind of propaganda infiltration in those Eastern European countries. That's all happening in the years previously. The alliance is 1981, 82, 83, 84. It's not 1999. So where is the King of the North here? Because this impacts how we're going to see this.
Yeah.
how we're going to see Raffia. Because in 1989 you don't see the United States. You don't have to. Who takes down the Soviet Union?
It's agency against oppression, right? It takes down itself.
Takes down itself. The people rise up and destroy it. That's done from the inside. When Daniel 11:40 portrays it, we look at those verses and we see the king of the north comes against the king of the south. And we've already all bought into the history of 1989 to 1991 and what it looks like. But then we have to, I would suggest we need to consider that history a little more closely if we're going to understand Raffia and Panion. Because then people go to Daniel 11 verse 13 and they see the battle of Panion. And they see that the king of the north is going to return with a multitude greater than the former, with a big army. And they're saying Panion, top war, America against Russia, and they're going to have new weapons and new tanks and new planes, and it's going to be this hot war because that's how it reads in verse 13. But then we need to go back to verse 40 and see this history and how we want to read verse 40. Because what this looked like was a breaking down from the inside. Do we understand what we're doing? So just in looking at 1989 to 1991, we see the history of Panion to Sunday Law. And does Russia have to end at 1991 to be defeated? No. So does Russia have to be completely taken over in this history to be defeated? But it didn't have to be defeated in this history. But why does it have to be in this history? Because this is a deadly wound and a death, and this is a deadly wound and a death. So what made this a death? What did they lose?
So in 1989, that history, wasn't there like a collapse of the Soviet Union though? Like we have some sort of loss of
Technology.
Yeah, like back then we were looking at the Soviet Union, not Russia, so all the Russia is the king of the south, if that makes sense. So when we're looking at it from Panion to Sandalov, you could say that Russia doesn't need to disappear because it didn't disappear before. But then what would that look like in terms of before, like there's a collapse of the Soviet Union, there was actually a lot of change in, not really change in geography, but you know what I mean, like there was actually a change. What would that look like in Panion and Sandalov?
What did they lose here?
Body.
Sorry?
Because of the body,
Body? What's another word for that?
satellite states.
Satellite states? Or if we went into and considered where those satellite states came from, which is World War II, what were they called? When Hitler and Stalin divided up those countries.
Eastern Bloc.
They called it the sphere of influence. So what he lost was his sphere of influence. So when we come to this history, what should we see Russia lose?
Sphere of influence.
So what are they fighting over?
Influence.
Spheres of influence. If we were to go back into the history, we'll just finish this and then we'll go back. So we compared part A and part B, and then we get to the end of part A, and we see that while the king of the north received a deadly wound and died, that it would resurrect, because this is a counterfeit of Christ's death and resurrection. So when we come to part B, what must the king of the south also do? It receives a deadly wound and dies, just based on parable teaching. What must it do?
Resurrect.
Resurrect after 91. So even though we see a deadly wound and a death, for the King of the South in 1989 and 91, if you were to compare it to part A, you see that it must have a resurrection. And then we took a step further, and we said this was comparing and contrasting the King of the North with the King of the South. The King of the North and the King of the South. We did a second compare and contrast, and what was that one?
King of the North, King of the North.
Two kings of the north. And why is there two, Sister Natalie?
Because Russia didn't really go into captivity, so you have to compare Israel, modern Israel,
Yes.
their captivity, and Babylon.
Yes. So when we talk about captivity, because we have the concept of captivity introduced into this history, the King of the South doesn't go into captivity, God's people go into captivity. So if we're going to consider the King of the North as a counterfeit, you can't compare and contrast it with the King of the South. But the King of the South is not part of anyone's kingdom. It's not part of God's kingdom. It's not part of Satan's kingdom. So if we talk about captivity, we have to compare King of the North, counterfeit, with the King of the North, true. And then we see who goes into captivity. You only go into captivity if you are in rebellion. It's a punishment. So God's people would go into rebellion, into apostasy, and because of that they would go into captivity. And when did papacy go into rebellion against their boss?
French Revolution, yeah.
Before the captivity of 1798, where did they go into captivity? So, talk about it.
1773.
Yes. 1773, they abolished the Jesuit order. And they've been given two job functions by their boss, Satan. One is to control the kings of Europe, and the second is to persecute God's people. And in 1773, the kings of Europe bring them an ultimatum. They have two choices. They can either abolish the Jesuit order or give up some of their land and wealth. And they decide that instead of losing temporal prosperity, they will abolish the Jesuit order. So what they essentially go into is a Laodicean condition, that it's rebellion against their boss. And if you go into rebellion or apostasy, you go into captivity. So this is apostasy, this is captivity. And they're going into captivity because they rebelled against their boss, and their boss is Satan. He's just counterfeiting. He's counterfeiting God's work with Israel. And he's using the same tools God used against his church, against his own church, the papacy. So he abolishes the Jesuits, they go into captivity, and at some point they're going to come out of captivity. And this is the story of the captivity of the papacy. And then we overlay that with another captivity. Because in 1798, they're going into captivity, and who's coming out of captivity? In 1798, God's people are coming out of captivity, and this is the history of modern Israel. So now we're comparing and contrasting modern Israel with modern Babylon to understand the concept of captivity. And what can we learn about modern Israel? What does the history of modern Israel look like? 1798, what history is that? Millerite history? Are we still in Millerite history?
Now you mean?
No, why?
Different dispensations.
Why are we in a different dispensation?
Because they never finished the work. They never fully went forward under the power of the third angel with the Holy Spirit to finish the work.
So there's this first history that ended in failure and disappointment. This was the Alpha. And then what happened?
God created the seventh-day Venice Church to assassinate denominational people.
So 1798 they received the first angel's message. And you can see the three angels' messages in this history illustrated in different ways. You can see it as the first and the second angel's message, and the third begins in 1844. Or you could see all three. Depends on the lesson you want to draw. If we were to just say it's the history of the first and the second, and then the third in 1844, you're familiar with that concept. And then the third runs through history until it's empowered. But it doesn't end in 1844 in this history. 1844, 1850, 1863, 1888. It doesn't end in that history. Why?
Has to be empowered.
Why couldn't it have been empowered in their history? What's their problem?
Time.
Few wicked evil men standing in the way.
They went into the Laodicean condition. They forgot their prophetic message, they let it go, and there had to be a new dispensation. The history of the 144,000.
It's because they rejected time,
Yeah. So it comes in two dispensations. This is an Alpha and an Omega. So what do we learn about the history of modern Israel? Yes.
Sorry to backtrack. I missed the link between making a king of the north and modern Israel. Is that what we're doing now?
Yes.
How do we do that?
If we see this as the history of the king of the north, which was the papacy,
I see that.
then if we see it that as a kingdom, it goes into captivity, as the people go into captivity, then God's people also went into captivity, because who's the true king of the north? Christ.
So you're taking the concept of the captivity, the gathering and scattering, seeing it in both lines,
Yes.
and that's what applies to the kingdom. Okay.
Because in 1798 they're scattered, the papacy is scattered.
So can you just repeat that last point about the dispensations?
When we look at the history of modern Israel, it takes place in two dispensations. Millerite dispensation and the 144,000 dispensation. It's the beginning and the end. And in between those dispensations there's a disappointment, failure and a Laodicean condition. So when we discuss the rising up of modern Babylon, its resurrection after 1798, what should we expect to see?
Similar thing.
How many dispensations for modern Babylon? So it's going to resurrect, it's going to have a first dispensation and a second dispensation. What does it need to come out of captivity or a scattering? What does it need to be gathered?
Messages.
Sorry?
Messages?
Prophecy.
How many? And when do they come? 1917. And those messages are threefold. The first one is fear. The second one, we'll skip. The third one is judgment. So they're messages of fear and judgment. And what's the second? Because the second gives the point. So if this was the true, what would the second be?
Glory.
Give God glory. It's the whole point of the three angels' messages. So if you went to the second, which is the whole point of Fatima, The whole point is to defeat the king of the south. And they're given that message in 1917. Why are they given it in 1917?
Same time with the Bolshevik Revolution.
When we look at the book of Daniel, and it says that the dragon was ready to devour the child before it was, as soon as it was born, it was really ready before it was born. Then we come to 1917, and what's happening? The king of the south has been born under the Bolshevik Revolution. The revolution begins in March, and it ends in November. And this is nestled between March and November, right in the centre of the Russian Revolution. They're given this message to defeat the king of the south. And the purpose of my question, why in his history would they be given these three messages? Was the message to Miller that he received in 1818? Is the message of 1818, was that to be wrapped up in a time capsule and kept for us? Was Miller's message just to be put in a bottle and stowed away until we come?
No.
No, why? It's for them. So the message of Fatima, is that for 2000 and something in Sunday law, or is that for them?
It's for them.
It has to be for them. So there has to be an original movement already underway by 1917. And we're not doing a study of Fatima, so I'm not going to go into proving that that begins in 1899. But we see an alpha history of modern Babylon, leading up to 1945, where there's a disappointment and a failing, and then you can trace it through this history. 1850, 1950 was allowed pride in the Catholic Church. 1863, we forgot our prophetic message and went into apostasy, or the Latter-day Edition. We went into apostasy against the prophetic message. 1862, the papacy goes into a secret deal with communism, with the Soviet Union. They forget their prophetic message, which was Fatima. And then, as we mentioned briefly last night, there's a failed attempt in 1989 which parallels 1888. We have Jones, Wagner and Ellen White. They had John Paul II and Lucia. So you can parallel their history in much more detail than just this. But what I wanted to see was just by using compare and contrast, we can come to the exact same conclusions we've been coming through by using Acts 27 and Pyrrhus.
I was going to ask, do you think there's a reason why the figures are so close to each other?
I don't understand, but for me it's just he's trying to counterfeit as closely as he can. Because it's not perfect and it was never attempted, but this is a 46-year history. This is a 46-year history. He's just trying to replicate 100 years later. And he gets some things wrong. 1798 and 1899 are not exact. Neither is 1917 or 1818. 1844 and 1945. 1850 and 1950 match. They can't be moved. 1862, 1863, 1888, 1989.
It's like they're all within 1 year.
Always. And I think you could do a study and go into this history and find it in more detail. Because this is a history, you have 1840, you have 1939 when the Second World War begins.
I mean 1962 or 1862?
Sorry, 1962, thank you.
Sorry, Tess, what was 1950 in that line?
1950.
What was it?
They made it, it was a jubilee year. Because they have a jubilee every 25 years in the Catholic Church. So they made this a jubilee year, and what they resurrected was the messages of Fatima and Mary. And it was supposed to be a rallying cry against communism. This is still, 1950 is still in the same history of Pope Pius XII, who was Pope for, who was really the Pope risen up for this history and the leadership. Do you have any questions?
It's previously seen that marks the time of the end in the history of Fatima as 1916. Do you remind me again of the relevance of 1916?
1916 is when an angel comes down. So the work on the children really begins in 1916. That's when it's not Mary, but there's an angel. And then in 1917 it's Mary. 1916 is like its preparation for 1917. And we also mark 1816 to 1818. When we talk about an increase of knowledge, it's 16 to 18. Here it's 16 to 17. But if we talk about 1798 and who's raised up here, who was raised up in 1798?
Miller.
William Miller. Who is raised up in 1899?
Lucia.
Lucia isn't born in 1899.
No, it's
Pope Pius XII. Because we have two prophets in this history. One is raised up as a new leadership, and then one receives direct communication from God. William Miller and Ellen White. In 1899 there's a new leadership raised up. This is Pope Pius XII. He's made a priest and he begins studying church law. But there's also a young woman raised up who receives not from prophecy but direct revelation itself. So she has visions, This is the history of William Miller and Ellen White. And then Ellen White continues to be a prophet throughout his history. Lucia doesn't die until 2005. She continues to be a prophet throughout his history and receive visions. So we see two leaders, Miller and Ellen White, two types of prophets. And in this history, when we talk about 1916 and 1917, it's really Lucia. But the time of the end, it's not that new prophet. It wasn't Ellen White raised up in 1798, it's Miller. So when we come to the counterfeit time of the end, it can't be the raising up of Lucia, it has to be the new leadership, which was Pacelli, who became Pope Pius XII. Hitler's father. But we also see Lucia. So the conclusions that we came to. The conclusions that I wanted us to see is, first of all, just by compare and contrast, we can see that part A of Daniel 11 verse 14 shows us a deadly wound and a death, and then we understand there will be a resurrection. So part B of Daniel 11 verse 14 shows us a deadly wound and a death of the king of the south, but then there must be a resurrection. Into this concept was also brought captivity, the idea of a scattering and a gathering. And then if we compare and contrast modern Israel and modern Babylon, we can see that when it comes out of captivity, it must happen in two separate histories, an Alpha and an Omega. What this gives us is the license to look at the histories of World War I and World War II and see what they're typifying. Because if we were to go through Acts 27, Pyrrhus, all of that brings us back to the exact same conclusions we've marked here. If we thought of the message of 2016 and of Raphia and Panium and this resurrection, it's all embedded in the actual verse if we study it as a parable. In the same way, we see World War I and World War II is this rising up of the King of the North, the battle between the King of the North and the King of the South. And we can do that same thing with compare and contrast. We can establish that just as well by going through the history of Pyrrhus. But we can also see that just by comparing them. If we want to understand our history, the very first place we look is Millerite history. Sister Daisy will tell us about that. We understand Millerite history to understand the history of the 144,000. So if we're going to understand the papacy at the end of the world, we have to understand World War I and World War II and what happened between 1899 and 1945. Because this history will tell us what the modern Babylon is going to look like. Do we understand it? Consider it. So we added a couple of details in this history. This is the history of the first and Millerite history, the first and the second angel's message. 1899 to 1945, you have the history of the First and the Second World War. And how many years is the First World War?
4.
How many years is the Second World War? 3. They have their two charts, their two messages. And that is what resurrected the papacy in this history. Financially, World War I, Germany resurrected the papacy, at least on the economic level. And then World War II was supposed to defeat the King of the South and bring in this new government. But they chose the wrong beast, and it ended in failure and disappointment. And then you could mark World War III from 1945 with the Cold War, running through that history until it's empowered. Because that's the King of the South against the United States just as much in the Cold War as we expected to see it in our history. So that's the revision of what we looked at last night. I just want us to consider one more subject that was linked to this. We kind of moved on quickly.
Tess, did you say that World War III starts in 1989?
2016.
1945. But I think you can see it in different ways. When we see the three angels' messages, we apply them differently. We would say that all three are in Millerite history. Or we would say that there's the first and the second, and then the third begins. Or we would just cut our line and move them into our time. So we juggle the three angels' messages depending on what point we want to make. I think you can do the same thing with World War III. You could either place it back in 1945, looking there, waiting to be empowered, or you could cut our line and move them right into our time. And we're reapplying World War I and World War II. It depends on the point we want to make. So we quickly discussed what 1989 looked like. The loss of the progressive loss of power until they lose their satellite states. And we called that spheres of influence. If we were to go back to Daniel 11 and the Battle of Raphia and Panium, what are they fighting over?
Territory?
We went to Daniel 11, verse 11 to 13. This is the battles of Raphia and Panium. And I just want us to quickly discuss that history. Am I allowed to run this out? If we started at verse 11.
Daniel 11, verse 11.
Yes. The Battle of Raphia. Somebody would read verses 11 to 15. Am I right to write this out?
And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, and he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of my people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall be any strength to withstand.
So those are the verses where we get the battles of Raphia and Panium. Raphia being back in this history. But we began to discuss Panium because we see that it is a repeat of a deadly wound. The same deadly wound we saw in 1989 becomes Panium, and then it progressively falls until 1991, which becomes Sunday Law. So if we were to discuss Raphia and Panion in their actual context of Daniel 11, what are they fighting over? Why are they fighting? Sorry?
Part of the territory, but there's also a treaty that is broken.
The treaty was broken. We might go back into that history then. If we were to go back to Daniel 11 verse 4. 11 verse 4. If somebody would read 11 verse 4.
And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his prosperity, nor his according to his dominion, which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those.
And verse 5, would you read verse 5?
And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above them, and have dominion. His dominion shall be great dominion.
So if we were to look into that history, this is the death of Alexander the Great. Alexander dies in 323 BC. And then what happens in the verse? It's divided into how many? So you have 4. You have Seleucus, Ptolemy, Cassander, who else? Lysimachus. So you have the division into 4 generals. Where does that happen? Because when Alexander the Great dies in 323, his kingdom is divided between them. Sorry?
301 when Magnus died.
This is 301 BC. The Battle of Ipsus. So it's 22 years after the death of Alexander that the rest of that verse is fulfilled, and the kingdom is actually divided between 4. And when it's divided between 4, are these fighting each other? At the Battle of Ipsus. They're in an alliance. So these 4 were in an alliance against someone else, and that was Antigonus. And Antigonus had a lot of territory. But the alliance was closest between Seleucus and Ptolemy. Because if you read verse 5, what's the relationship between them?
One of his princes.
Yes, it was actually one of his generals at one time. So the relationship is strong between Seleucus and Ptolemy. They're allies. And they're allies when the kingdom is divided into 4. Because they go into this battle as on the same side, even though Ptolemy doesn't turn up to fight it. His moral support, he's on the same side. So in verse 4, they're on the same side. And then what happened? When they defeated Antigonus, they had to divide up Antigonus's substantial territory between the 4 generals. Really between the 3, because Ptolemy was the only one that wasn't there at the actual battle. If I was to draw a terrible map, this is the Mediterranean Sea. This is Egypt. Battle of Ipsus was fought somewhere up here. This is Babylon. So this is Ptolemy. And this is Seleucus. And what happens? In 301 BC is Antigonus is defeated, and Antigonus had all of this territory. And this territory had to be divided between these generals. And when they divided up Antigonus' territory, there's an area here known as Cilicia. and it's an extremely important, strategically important area. After the Battle of Ipsus, it was given to Seleucus. But before Seleucus could come and take this territory, Ptolemy went and took Syria. So this...
So can you say that again? It was given to Seleucus?
At the Battle of Ipsus, all of this area that had belonged to Antigonus was divided between the generals. And this area of Syria was given to Seleucus. But before Seleucus could come and take Syria, Ptolemy marched up and took control of the area. And remember, when Ptolemy does this, that they are allies. They are friends. They've worked at the same, they've functioned at the same court, they've fought on the same side. Seleucus has been his general. But Ptolemy does this antagonistic act of taking Syria from Seleucus before Seleucus can arrive. And Syria actually had originally been part of Ptolemy's dominion. So he had some reason to feel like he should have ownership of that area. And because these two men are friends, they know that Seleucus never responds. He just lets Ptolemy have it. But when they both die, their children aren't so forgiving. And Seleucus' grandson, those kings try to take it back from Ptolemy. So when we come to the history of Daniel 11, those first 15 verses, what are they fighting over? Does Seleucus or any of those kings want to take Egypt? No. They have no interest in Egypt. And the Ptolemies have absolutely no interest in Babylon. They're not trying to take each other's kingdom. The first 15 verses of Daniel 11 are all about spheres of influence. All they want is Syria. And because of this, they fight 6 Syrian wars. The end of the 4th is Raphia. The end of the 5th is Panium. And then there's one other war, but it was fairly inconsequential. It's really the 4th and 5th that ended it. So you see Raphia and Panium are built into this story, and they're not fighting to take each other's kingdoms, they're fighting over spheres of influence. And the sphere of influence that they want is Syria.
Is that because of trade?
Yes, I think in here, Elder Carminda started touching this area also when he was speaking about 1840 and the Eastern question, the Ottoman Empire, because there's that connection, that strait here into the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
This was where the Ottoman Empire, why it was important, why the Eastern question was important. So this area continues to be of strategic importance. So when we're discussing the deadly wound and the death at the Battle of Panium, so at Raphia, I won't give them their king's names, we'll keep it simple. Seleucus and Ptolemy meet, they fight the Battle of Raphia. It's a victory for the king of the south. At the Battle of Panium, the king of the north comes back against the king of the south and defeats him. Does he take Egypt at Panium? No. Even at Panium, at the end of this war, Egypt is never taken. So when we went into this history and we said, or we went into the verses that say he only went up to the neck at Panium, he only goes up to the neck at Panium as well. So how do we excuse saying up to the neck means not a total defeat? Because the Battle of Panium, he only went up to the neck. The king of the north took this far and no farther. He never took Egypt. Because the whole war, the 6 Syrian wars of Raphia and Panium, were about Syria. And it all was sparked from Ipsus. And where do we apply Ipsus?
Raphia. 2016, was it?
We make application of Ipsus as 2016, and who's on the same side?
King of the North, King of the South.
Seleucus and Ptolemy, they're on the same side in that battle. So we could look at Ipsus and discuss Pyrrhus, but we don't have to go to Pyrrhus to see this. We can see that just in the story of Daniel 11 as well.
And why do we apply it to 2016?
We would have to go to Pyrrhus to make that connection. But when we looked at Pyrrhus, we saw the death of Alexander in 323 BC. This is Daniel 11 verse 4. We're just going to put it on a line. 323 BC is the death of Alexander. And then what does Daniel do? He skips 22 years and takes us to 301 BC, which is Ipsus. And in those 22 years, he skips how many wars?
Is it 4?
4. These are the 4 Diadochi Wars. He skips 4 years and takes us from the cause, the death of Alexander, to the effect. The cause is the death of Alexander. The effect is the division into 4, the 4 generals. North, south, east and west. How long are there 4 generals for? Sorry?
When is this under then?
3 to 4 years later. So Daniel picks up the death of Alexander. He skips 22 years. Some of the biggest battles of this time period, the greatest general of this time period, Antigonus. He skips all that history to mark the end of the 4th war and just this little blip of time. It's 3 to 4 years where you have Alexander's empire divided into 4. It's only like a little blip of time. And he does that to make a prophetic point. So when we consider Ipsus, and I would suggest to make Ipsus 2016, we're doing the same thing. Ipsus is the cause of this war. And we just saw that. It's the cause over Syria. It's a result of Ipsus. We just said there's 6 Syrian wars that take us to what? The Battle of Raphia. So we see the Battle of Ipsus, 4 Syrian wars take us from the cause to the effect. Ipsus is the cause, Raphia is the effect. I would suggest that's another evidence to show Ipsus as 2016. So the purpose of this was to help us consider what Raphia and Panion looked like. Is Putin trying to take over the United States? Or is the United States trying to take out Russia? What do they want? Spheres of influence. And it's a repeat of the history of 1989 to 91. In this history you have Eastern Europe. When we come down to Raphia and Panion and Sunday Law, and these waymarks, what are they fighting over? It's the same thing as spheres of influence. Do you have any questions or thoughts?
Can you go to that part again in the top journal?
What Daniel does in verse 4 is he takes the death of Alexander and skips 4 Diadochi wars. And he goes from the cause to the effect. And the effect is the Battle of Ipsus, where he's marking these 4 generals rising up. And to apply Ipsus, we're just taking that history from a different perspective and doing the same thing. These are the Diadochi wars. These are the Syrian wars. And we're saying Ipsus was the cause. That's when they split over Syria. So we take Ipsus, we skip 4 Syrian wars, go to the end of the 4th, and it's the Battle of Raphia. That's the effect. In making application. Yes?
Further to that, what is the waymark, or what happened in 2016, which then you used to show as a cause to the effect of Raphia? That makes sense.
You see a battle where the king of the north and the king of the south are in an alliance.
Trump's election. Trump elected because Russia helped him get it.
Okay.
Putin, Trump.
I see.
Is Raphia the cause? I mean, is Raphia the effect because it speaks of it in Daniel 11:11? Or why isn't the first Syrian or the second Syrian war the effect? If that makes sense.
Break a pattern.
The pattern.
If we apply that to our history, I think Daniel's already given us the pattern to follow.
Okay.
And then we can see that after Ipsus or 2016, when the relationship is good, this is where it's broken.
Yeah, but does Daniel speak of the 3 Syrian wars, or does it go straight to Raphia?
He speaks of these wars.
Oh, does it?
This is the history in the first 15, in the first,
Okay.
between verse 4 and verse 11. It goes into detail in this history. And I'm saying he can do that, but if he can skip these 4, we can skip these 4. He's given us the pattern.
Does it look like us skipping 4?
Which one? The Syrian?
Yeah, you said if he can do it, we can do it. So what step are we skipping?
I'm saying we're skipping the history between Ipsus and Raphia. Because there's 4 Syrian wars in here that have all these details. I'm saying that's noise when it comes to our application. Because Daniel can look at all of this history of Alexander, of the breakup of the Greek Empire, and he can skip these 4 really quite monumental wars with Antigonus. In here you have the Babylonian War, you have the start of the Seleucid Empire. All of that happens within his history, and Daniel just skips it because he wants to make a prophetic point. And for his application, all of that is noise. And he will just go from cause to effect. So when we bring that down and see Ipsus and Raphia, and we're trying to understand what they're fighting over, and we see cause and effect, we skip the 4 Syrian wars, we go from Ipsus to Raphia. So are there any more thoughts or questions?
Let's take it back a little bit. No, you said in 1899. Was it 1899 Pat? Or was it 1890?
Yes,
Yeah, before
1899.
previous one. You said there was a change of leadership. What did you mark? What happened then in 1899?
So we lined 1899 up with 1798
Yeah,
because this was the raising up of William Miller.
yeah. So you had William Miller and Ellen White, and then you had what's her name? Lucy, not Lucy. What's her name?
Pacelli.
Pacelli. So what happened? What about Pacelli? Because what did you mark it as then?
Miller. No one knows who Miller is in 1798. That
Yeah.
change in leadership is progressive.
No, but what I mean is in 1899, what happened to Pacelli?
He's made a priest.
Oh, he's made a priest. Okay, that's right.
So it's ordained to the priesthood, and he begins studying church law. And it's his study of church law that enables him to make a deal with Hitler.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So he's having his own increase of knowledge from 1899 that's separate to Fallon.
So I thought you said that's when he was born.
No.
No, it's okay.
No, he begins his study.
That's good.
So any other... Am I alright to wrap? Yes?
Just a small point, might not be relevant, but it was just when you just said Pacelli was raised up 1898, started studying, and he makes a, did you say he makes a pact with Hitler? You use the word, what did you just say? Makes a
they go like a deal.
Deal, right? Because that's the same with Billy Miller. He's raised up, studying church law, and he makes a deal with God, and you say, okay, I've got to do what you want me to do, and providing that you open the way. So obviously you line up the both individuals at the same time.
He's made a priest that overturning of the Catholic leadership is progressive. And I think that's something that we study more into what that actually looks like, the overturning of leadership. So we're okay with all of this? What I wanted us to consider is this area of Cilicia, because this is the same area that we come to 1798 and 1840. This is the same area that we follow the Euphrates River. It's been strategically important ever since then. So we all agreed that what they're fighting over is spheres of influence. You're all much quieter than the Brazilians. It's kind of feel free to fight.
Must be the diet.
Sorry?
Must be the diet.
Maybe all those sweet foods.
It's the video.
They have spicy foods and stuff, and that's the eat.
Okay, I didn't have anything.
With the illustration on the right, I'm struggling to put in what we know about Pyrrhus and Asculum Beneventum, because we do it, I know it's another line, so it doesn't go with this line, it's just a totally different line. We don't relate it at all.
We haven't had to go to Pyrrhus to do any of this.
No.
This is seeing it from just our understanding of Daniel 11 and Raphael and Panion.
And when we do the Pyrrhus, we don't skip the wars until we do the wars, we make it way more.
Yeah, these 4 diadrinking wars are what we go into.
Yeah.
Because when we discuss, traditionally when we go into those verses of Daniel 11, we're digging in this history. To understand Pyrrhus, we're digging in this history. So we're treating it in the same fashion, I think is the point. Yeah. So I just wanted us to consider, in our last little while, what's happening between Russia and America. What are they fighting over? Because we no longer have Eastern Europe. That's not, we don't have those satellite states anymore. So where are they fighting? What do they want?
What are they fighting?
What do they want? What does Putin want from Trump?
It's information, is it?
He's going to use that. He's using that. But what does he want? So I'm not saying it's all about just this area, but if we just consider the Syrian war, because it's the same, not exact, but it's a similar area. And we'll use the map we have already drawn. Just a little bit of history. So Russia is a huge supplier of natural gas. They supply about 1/4 of Europe's natural gas needs. And it transports this gas through pipelines into Europe. So it's expensive to use tankers to move the gas from Russia into Europe. It's much more efficient to use pipelines. And this is what they've been doing. The only issue is that this gives Russia a lot of power over Europe. So when they went into a conflict in Ukraine and Georgia, when Russia had a problem with those nations, what they did is they waited till December, winter time in Eastern Europe, and they turned off all the gas. They just turned off the tap. And they left Ukraine and Georgia without any heating for their homes in the middle of the Eastern European winter. So they're known to use this as political clout. It's part of their political leverage, which is why Obama said, I think he said it in 2014, more publicly, but he was just saying something that the United States has known for a long time, that if they're to be able to restrain Russia, they need to bypass Russia in the natural gas market. They need to find other suppliers for Europe other than Russia. So if we went back to 2009, down here is the Persian Gulf. So this is the Persian Gulf. Please don't mind my drawing. But down in the Persian Gulf you have Qatar. And it has access to natural gas in the Persian Gulf. So in 2009, Qatar puts forth a proposal. And what they want to do is they want to build a pipeline from the Persian Gulf to pipe their gas into Europe. And they're going to build this pipeline. I got rid of some of this. They want to build this pipeline through Saudi Arabia. They're going to build it through Saudi Arabia, up through Syria, through Turkey, and into Eastern Europe. Turkey, Saudi Arabia. But who is Qatar an ally with? Who's Qatar allied to? Qatar has the largest US military base in this area of the Middle East, or in the Middle East, I think it might be the Middle East itself. Qatar is an ally of the United States. As Saudi Arabia has been for the most part, although that's waning. But Qatar especially is an ally of the United States. Turkey is also friendly. But they want to build this pipeline from Qatar through Saudi Arabia, through Syria, and through Turkey into Europe. And this pipeline would have enabled them to move natural gas into Europe that really would have weakened Russia's influence in Europe. So to build this pipeline, it has to go through Syria, and this is 2009. And what is Syria's response? This is Assad, and who is he allied to? So what does he say in response to this pipeline?
No.
No, he won't have it. He won't have it because he's allied to Russia and he knows what they're trying to do, which is bypass Russia. So he says no to the pipeline.
So you're saying who wanted to build this pipeline?
Qatar.
Qatar. To where?
To Europe. So that's 2009. But there's another nation with access to the gas in the Persian Gulf. And that's the country on the other side, and that's Iran. And who's Iran allied to? So Iran has natural gas. And in 2011, they decided they want to build a pipeline into Europe. And they're going to build it a little differently. In here is Iraq. What they want to do is they want to take their natural gas, they're going to pipe it through their allies, they're going to get it through Iraq, through Syria, then they're going to build it underneath the Mediterranean Sea into Greece. So this is their pipeline. And now what does Syria say?
So Iran wants to build a pipeline to Greece.
It would hit the continent of Greece, but it will go to Europe.
So not to Russia.
Sorry?
Not to Russia.
No, Russia doesn't need natural gas, they've got all their own. But their pipeline would also supply Europe. So Qatar has a pipeline, they're allied to the United States. Qatar wants to pipe their natural gas into Europe. Iran has less natural gas than Qatar, but they've got some, and they want to pipe it through Iraq, also through Syria, and then into Europe. Whichever pipelines are built to transport natural gas from the Middle East into Europe, they have to go through Syria. It's almost impossible to bypass Syria. And now what does Syria say? Because they've said no to Qatar, what do they say to Iran?
Yes.
Yes, they're happy for that proposal. Why?
Russia.
Because they have a boss, and their boss says it's okay. Iran has less natural gas, they're not a threat, they're an ally. And that was in 2011.
And then we'll justify the gas when they run out.
Early 2011. Between 2011 and 2013, Qatar begins to fund anti-Assad rebel groups. So does Saudi Arabia, so does the United States. And what developed later in 2011 was the beginning of the Syrian civil war. So the Syrian civil war began in 2011. It's been going for 8 years now. And why are they fighting over Syria? Why is that civil war still raging?
Okay, thanks.
Because this is strategically important. The United States can't, Russia particularly cannot afford to lose Syria to America's sphere of influence. If Russia loses Syria to America's sphere of influence, that's not just Syria that they lose. They lose control over the natural gas market and over the Middle East. So when we talk about Syria being a proxy war, this is why. You could start dividing up much of the world between two parties, King of the North and King of the South, the United States and Russia. So everyone follows it.
Why haven't Iran, Iraq and Syria got on with it? Is it because of sanctions and the bombings from America and Syria?
Yeah, the civil war is
Just
completely...
stopping.
It was meant to be completed years ago.
Yeah.
But the plans all stopped, they just can't build it through this civil war.
Yeah.
Which is not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that all happened at the right time. 2011 was Arab Spring and it shut down all of the plans for this pipeline. So we can divide, just talking about the Syrian civil war, we can see that it's a fight over sphere of influence. And then we can start putting other histories, other countries into this story. We can talk about Ukraine, Venezuela. Do you have any others?
North Korea, Yemen, is it?
North Korea. Here?
Yemen.
Cuba as well.
Why is the king so interested in Venezuela? It's just power.
Not sure why they're so interested in Venezuela. I don't think they want to lose. In 2011, all of this happened because of Arab Spring. And it wasn't just Syria, it went all across this area, and particularly where it hit was Libya. So Libya was an ally, Libya was on this side. And this was Gaddafi. And what happened to Gaddafi?
Beheaded by you.
I don't think they beheaded him, but they did a lot else.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was saying sorry. I was mixing the two up.
Uh-oh. So in 2011, who orchestrated this overthrow in Libya? This was the CIA, and they didn't try and hide it. And Libya was an ally of Putin. In 2011, you have Arab Spring, Gaddafi is overthrown, and the CIA promised Gaddafi that he wouldn't die. That if he just stepped down, he would live. He went into hiding, they dragged him out, they brutalised him, they killed him, and it was all on tape. And that tape found its way to Vladimir Putin. And he sat and he watched his ally die. I don't know if it's true, but sources inside the Kremlin say that he watched that death of Gaddafi on repeat 3 times. And then he stood up and he said never again. And this is 2011, but when he sees Libya fall because of the CIA, his own ally has fallen because of the CIA, he blames the United States, and he has reason to, because they didn't try and hide it. Hillary Clinton, she was actually being recorded when someone approached her and gave her the memo that Gaddafi had just died. And she says her first response, her recorded response to this news was, "We came, we saw, he died." That's Clinton's response to Gaddafi's death. So she acknowledges that that was the work of the United States. And Putin just watched that happen, and he doesn't just blame the United States. Who does he blame? in 2011. Clinton, that was all her work. That all happened under Hillary Clinton's watch. So it's not just the United States, he can put a face to it, and it was Hillary Clinton. So 2011 we had Arab Spring. It's not just Syria that's caught up in this. This is a fight really over spheres of influence across many countries, and Libya was one that fell. And we're seeing it escalate now in Venezuela, particularly that's happening quite quickly. But this is where I would suggest the war is being fought. If we're going to talk about spheres of influence in this history and what is lost at Panion and some level, what do they lose? How much political clout does Russia have left if it loses Syria? How much influence? Do you have any other thoughts or questions?
What North Korea?
North Korea? What would happen if they lost North Korea? I think there's some reason to believe that all these countries under US sanctions, they do their own internal trade.
I think given the divide between North Korea and South Korea came as a result of the world wars. If we're linking that kind of history of the world wars and this battle between the king of the north and the king of the south, I don't know if North Korea would still be part of that.
I think each of these are important in their own ways. It's easier to see in Syria, but just in the last few years it's all come back in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a proxy war again. Back in 1979, which side was supporting the government? Russia. And who supported the rebels?
USA.
And now it's switched, who's supporting the government? America, and just lately who's been arming the rebels? It's been Russia again. So Afghanistan, when they entered Afghanistan in 2001, Russia and the United States were on the same side, but now they're on opposing sides again. Afghanistan has become another proxy war. And most of this has arisen, we come to 1991, these aren't the areas they're fighting over. This has developed over time. Now there's a new sphere of influence. And if this is a repeat of 1989, they begin to fall. 1991, what do we expect to see them losing? I would suggest this is where the bone's being fought out. So, where is the United States in 1989? This war becomes both more difficult to understand but also more easier if we see it in the context of history. But I don't think we're going to be able to identify this war without lines of prophecy. Because if you were to just isolate 1989 from its past and from its future and just take it out as a year, or if we were to just take November 9, 1989 as a day, you cannot tie the United States to that. You have to understand its surrounding history and what they're fighting over, and what the United States was doing from 1945 or in the history of the Cold War. You don't see it every day. And I think we're in danger when it comes to Raffia and Panion if we think that we're going to see some fight between the United States and Russia, at Raffia even, that's going to be obvious. And we're going to see, oh, this is Trump and Putin, this is Russia and the United States. We didn't get that in 1989. We had to understand the history surrounding it and what they're fighting over. What they're fighting over is Eastern Europe and spheres of influence. And what they're fighting over now is over Syria and Iran and Venezuela and North Korea and Ukraine. So those global politics become much more important when we start considering what we expect to see. Do you have any other thoughts?
saying, like in 1989 and the 11th of November, we didn't see America and Russia at it. But he's saying so on the 9th of November we won't see like Putin and Trump or other things going on in the world between the king of the north and king of the south.
I don't think it's going to be that easy, no. I think we can identify it because of prophecy. And we can also see, in 1989, it's their own people that rose up and fought against them. If we see the people rise up against Donald Trump in the United States, we know that Putin's had his hand in that. But whether or not we actually see it on the day is different.
So I say, will it just be like a normal day where we won't see like anything to mark, okay, this is what being fulfilled?
If the people were to challenge Donald Trump, you would only understand Russia had that hand in that if we'd also accepted 2016 and the fact that they were actually in an alliance in the first place. But when we get to that waymark, when we come to 1989 or November 9 this year, if we've already rejected all that past information, we don't come to that day and somehow be convinced by anything we can see externally, which makes it more concerning for the people that walk away from the movement, because I don't think they're going to be given something external to see to convince them. They would have to already see this in the prophecy.
So you're saying most of the world can be divided between the king of the north and the south, at least most of the key countries. So that makes it a worldwide warfare, in a sense. It's all proxy wars through king of the north and king of the south.
I think so. I think you could divide most countries between the two, and some of them are a little bit torn. So when we say that countries after Rapid start siding with the king of the south, here in England, they already give Russia a lot of free space to move. There's been that many Russian people assassinated in England, and your government here just covers it up. They don't investigate it because they're afraid of repercussions from Russia. So there's countries that are kind of in the middle, or countries that play both sides.
Would you say what determines what side they're on is economic strategy? Like trade in certain things, and that's why they're going to decide, or actually who makes the decision which side they're on? Is it the king of the south and north, or is it the country themselves deciding who to, based on trade? So like England, say, now is out of fear, is siding with America, although we know England's always sided with America, king of the north anyway, but because of fear of repercussions.
Yeah.
Do you think that's hot war repercussions or trade repercussions from Russia?
I think it's mostly trade.
Trade, so it's a trade war.
So there is a kind of, some places are torn into not being strictly for one side, but when circumstances get harder, like in Venezuela, like they did in Ukraine, then they take a strong side for one or the other.
So when it comes to food on the table, they decide which side to go on because of that?
Yes, or gas in their homes.
Do you think that impacts, when it says all the world wandered after the beast, it's going to impact what that looks like because of what we're seeing here? It doesn't look like we thought it would.
If we took that back to the story of the resurrection, and we compared and contrasted, what is the world doing when it looks at Russia and Putin? At the resurrection of the king of the north, the world wondered. And now that everyone, I think they are already looking to Russia and Putin. They're seeing the resurrection, they're wondering after Russia, they're wondering after the beast. Because what happened to Russia? It was completely decimated after 1991. And now it's come back as a global superpower. So I would start at, sorry?
So do you think that the news or mainstream media probably deny any Russian involvement in anything that happens? So like the election in 2016.
Yeah.
I know as far as I read that it wasn't true that Russia was involved.
It's all in the papers nowadays.
In the sense that it's like.
I mean, like now they say it is true.
Pardon?
It is true. It's even in the British papers to say Russia colluded with
I've heard people. I've kind of read that they've investigated it and it's not.
It's probably a good report.
what happened, there's two things they're looking at. The first is, did Russia itself interfere in the election? That one has never, unless you wanted to listen to Trump, which millions of people do, for reasons I don't know why, then you would believe that Russia didn't help him win the election. But the vast majority, every trustworthy news media outlet, the CIA, the FBI, every agency in the United States who's looked at it, everyone else who's looked at it, it's irrefutable that Russia helped him win. The part that they're now arguing over is whether or not did Trump know about it and did he authorize it? What was Trump's involvement in Russia's help? Russia's help isn't open to dispute, is what Trump knew about it. And in that investigation, I really like the team that was put together to do that, Robert Mueller and all of his work. I think he's such a respectable man. In what I have looked into him, I think he would, any investigation he would do would be by the book. And if you're going to charge the President of the United States, what he would need would be a rock-hard case where there is absolutely no room for doubt. So when he released his report on just a few weeks ago, based on his investigation, not into Russia's interference, but into what Donald Trump knew about it, he said that he could not prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. So he hasn't vindicated Trump in any way. What he said is that he can't prove it beyond there being still doubt.
Because essentially he even said that they couldn't prove it, but then the president is not exonerated from it. So basically it's saying like, we don't have the evidence, but lack of evidence doesn't mean that that's evidence that it didn't happen. If that makes sense. It's just not enough to charge the president. And everyone around the president is also, they're all saying, like what was the name of his advisor who went to jail?
Paul Mann. I think there's like 36 people that have been charged because of that investigation. When Trump's campaign manager is in jail, you know that they've uncovered evidence. They just can't. It's not enough to pull Trump from the White House and put him in prison.
But what I'm asking in relation to that, you know how with that it's who you believe really. Is it going to be the same in terms of Rafi as in it's not going to be hard evidence, it's going to, everyone's free to choose what they want, how they view it. So if I ask one person, they'll say they don't believe that Trump got help from Russia, it's all like propaganda. Whereas, do you think that's going to happen at Rafi where it's neither here nor there? If that makes sense.
I think I keep using the United States because there it's just so much easier to see, is those that have bought in 2000, really beginning 2014, who started buying into that kind of propaganda machine that was set up, leading to Trump's campaign, then they build into theories that are no stronger than the idea of a flat earth. And if they want to say the earth is flat, people believe that. If they want to say that there was nothing between Putin and Trump, people will believe that. So, especially now, we're seeing people believe whatever they want to believe. And they're doing that with 2016, with Rafi and Cannon. It gets it harder to have a logical argument. But I think there's enough to see. I think there has to be enough externally to see for people to be able to understand what's going on. It's easier because we have prophecy. And then if we have prophecy, we know what happened. But I think people in the world are also required to understand what's going on.
But the truth that people understand is that saying about Seventh-day Adventists in America because they voted for Trump.
There's people in the United States saying this is the rising up of Hitler. Because all the same things apply to them that apply to us. If we forget our past history, we're doomed to repeat it. If American citizens forget their past history, they're doomed to repeat it. And you have a huge amount of American citizens who never want to be reminded of slavery or the Civil War or any of their past history. They don't want to be reminded of World War I because they won't be reminded, they're doomed to repeat it. And they're now voting in Hitler because they don't even know about World War within the Adventist church, we get caught up in the exact same path as the evangelicals, because it's the evangelicals that put Trump in the White House. And we find even in this movement we were using the same excuses for him that they were using, because we're thinking the same. We need to start seeing it through prophecy. If you would kneel in prayer, we would Father in heaven, thank you for your Sabbath. I pray you'll help us to understand not just the future but also the past, so we can understand what it looked like and how it was laid out in us. I pray you'll bless our fellowship, our conversation, and our discussions on these things. And bless your people all over the world, Lord, as they meet and they study. I pray you'll be with our windows and teachers in the French Islands and the groups there, and also in Arkansas and in Australia and New Zealand. All over the world as people come together to search out your life.